Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Now at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it. Tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. May has thrown this late left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading in with Barshot. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotti, here with you guys as always. Josh Marlowe joining me once again tonight here on this edition of the podcast. And it is time to look at Carolina's win over the Stanford Cardinal. Carolina holds on to beat them 20-15. So we'll dive into everything from that game, including a dominant defensive line performance. Just overall a really strong showing from the defense once again. But a little bit conservative there at the end of the game. We'll talk about why this game was closer than it probably should have been down the stretch. We'll also talk about the big question of Gio Lopez and just what you do at the quarterback position. So many people in the first half of this game wanting Gio Lopez on the bench, and in the second half of the game watching him complete a pretty nice win for Carolina over Stanford overall, based on the fact that he didn't have much of a running game. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, the struggles of that running game and what Carolina should do for that. And then, of course, we are now 3 games away from the end of the season here, 3-game stretch to close the year out. With Carolina winning back-to-back games, where do we stand now heading into those final 3 games of the season? Where is our trust in Bill Belichick and the staff as we sit here 9 games into the year? We'll talk about that for you guys, as well as mention the stuff that, is coming out around, from some of the national people in the NFL, suggesting that Bill Belichick could be a potential hire for the New York Giants, who fired their head coach earlier today. What do we make of that stuff? We'll talk about that as well. But as I mentioned, let's start with how Carolina beat Stanford. And it's really pretty simple, guys. This defense for Carolina, we've talked about it. This is what you show up to Kenan Stadium to watch. This is what you tune in on your televisions to watch week in and week out, as Carolina put on dominant defensive performances. Now, again, these are not coming against some of the best offenses in the country by any stretch. It did in the game against Virginia. But outside of that, these are not exactly the greatest offenses that Carolina has ever seen. There will be some good offenses that Carolina has to face down the stretch of the season, mainly the Duke Blue Devils and the NC State Wolfpack in the final 2 games of the season. But, man, this defense just continues to find a way to put together really, really strong performances in this game. And once again, in this one, it was led by the defensive front, which just dominates. 2 guys with 3 sacks in this game. It's the first time in the history of Tar Heel football that Carolina has had 2 guys have 3 sacks in a game individually. So that is a huge accomplishment for Carolina. 9 total sacks in this game for the Tar Heels. And that's a big reason why Carolina comes out of this game victorious. The star of this game, once again, was Milcard Abujade, who has just been phenomenal. 5 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 6 total quarterback pressures. As influential of a defensive player as Carolina has on this defense right now, and a big part of why things have turned around, because in each of the last 3 games, he has at least 2 sacks in that stretch. He has now reached 10 sacks for the season, the first player to do that since Kareem Martin did it back in 2013. So all of that, I mean, just a tremendous performance from this group as a whole. But Milcard Abujade is the one that everybody should be talking about, and he's a name that everybody in college football should get to know at this point in the season, because he has been phenomenal over the last 3 weeks.
He's playing at a level that I don't even think we thought was possible for him to reach this year. I mean, he leads the ACC in sacks, and he's no far from a talent perspective. I don't think you would list him as one of the more gifted pass rushers, but this is just a guy that has a relentless energy, a motor, and he's paying off. The hard work he's put in is paying off, and he's the anchor of what's become quietly a really solid defense as a whole. I think I saw where Carolina on the year is giving up 320 yards per game. I mean, that's remarkable considering kind of where they were after the TCU game, what happened against Central Florida, and even against Clemson, where they just got drug up and down the football field. But they've really morphed into the type of defense that they were capable of being and what we expect them to be under Bill Belichick. And what they did on Saturday was quite simply take advantage of a bad offensive line. We talked about how bad Stanford's offensive line was entering the game, and that we expected Carolina to dominate at the point of attack. And they did that, led by Milcard. Tyler Thompson continues his emergence since the bye week. You got as consistent production from Smith Vilbert as you've gotten all season long, among some other guys as well. And this was why back in the preseason, we were optimistic Carolina could do some big-time things in year one, because the schedule allowed for them to win some of these types of games and really beat up on some of those opponents. That's not going to happen in terms of winning, 8, 9, 10 games, because you were 2-5, but they're doing now what we thought they were going to do back in the preseason. And it's because of what they're able to do up front, what they're able to do defensively. Since the Cal game, they've had an identity. They know who they are. They know the style of football that they have to play to win. And they should be 4-0 post the bye. Instead, they're 2-2, but you can really start to see Bill Belichick and this coaching staff work their wonders, work their magic, and it's why I think they're as well positioned as they could be to make a run at a bowl game, and that's not something I think we thought was possible when this program was 2-5 a month ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely nobody thought that this team had a chance to make a bowl game with where they were earlier this season. But I think now, you talked about, Stanford's offensive line being a poor unit. Yeah, they are, but I don't think anybody could have imagined 9 sacks. And even if you did, what Carolina's doing is they're taking advantage of the opponent's weaknesses on the offensive side of the ball, but with their defense. They did not do that in years past. In years past, it did not matter what group you rolled in here. You always looked like an offense that was functioning at its highest rate of the season whenever you played Carolina. It was, come in there. That's the get right game for your offense, and things would completely change for a lot of those groups that Carolina played, where their offenses would succeed for the rest of the season, because that was the game that they pointed back to. You don't get that now with Carolina's defense. Now Carolina's defense is going to take advantage of whatever weaknesses that you have. And you look at what Milcard is doing. I mean, for him to be a guy that came from Delaware, we knew it was going to take him some time to develop, But I mean, yeah, they're doing this without Price Yates, guys. They needed somebody to step up. And it was almost as if Price Yates really needed to get to the point where, he said after that Clemson game, I just, I'm going to step away. I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. And it makes a lot of sense, taking care of his future health. And it felt like that was the moment that really unlocked everything for Carolina, because that's when guys started to step up. That's when Tyler Thompson steps up and gets a big sack in the game against Cal. And all of a sudden, since that point, he's had a sack in every game. He's had a sack in 4 straight games. In this game, you mentioned it, 3 total tackles, all of them were sacks, and 3 total quarterback pressures, all of which were sacks. I mean, he was just outstanding in this game. He is a guy that I think you look at guys that are developing as the season goes along. And Milcard is a great example as well. But if you need another example of a guy that's being developed by this coaching staff, Tyler Thompson is a great example. He is a guy that as the season has gone along, you've started to see the number of snaps go up. He just played 44 snaps in this last game. And part of it was that, yes, Stanford was throwing the football a lot, especially in that second half. But the other part of it is that you're starting to see him develop a little bit as a run defender. He's starting to win in those downs. He's starting to do a better job of sealing the edge for Carolina. And so when you see that, you're seeing the development that we were hoping to see from these guys. Smith Vilbert, he's gotten better as the season's gone along as well. You pointed him out. 4 total tackles in this game, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack, and 2 total quarterback pressures. I thought, that was maybe the best game that we've seen from him all year. Very impactful in the run game, gets after the quarterback at one point during the game, a couple of different points actually during the game, and, finishes one off with a sack. I thought he was really good for Carolina out there the other night. And then you go to the interior of the unit and, you continue to see, DeAndre Robinson has a sack in this game, a couple of nice plays from Leroy Jackson. CJ Mims, 5 total tackles in the game. So he's had a strong performance these last few weeks for Carolina. And, even though we didn't get to mention him a ton in this game, not nearly as much as some of the other games that we've seen him, Isaiah Johnson, still 4 tackles in this game. So he's involved in everything that Carolina does on the interior in run defense. And so these guys on the interior, I mean, once again, I know that you got some yards from the running backs. Micah Ford definitely was running through some tackles. There's no doubt about that. The rushing number, little misleading when you have 9 sacks, but still, I thought those guys did a really good job. And yeah, this is the group that's leading Carolina right now. It is outstanding to see that. But then, behind them, it's really the front 6 for Carolina that are doing a really good job right now, because the linebackers were amazing as well in this game. Andrew Simpson, 6 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 total quarterback pressures, and forces a fumble. He was great, but he wasn't even the best linebacker on the field the other night. That was Kamori House, who was absolutely everywhere. 13 total tackles. He has an interception, the first of his career, and a pass breakup. He ends up winning ACC Linebacker of the Week. He was just outstanding. So I think the success that you're seeing from the defensive line, and this is something we've been wanting to see for the last few years, but haven't really been able to, it's allowing these linebackers to thrive even more than in years past. Even though the statistics might not be crazy during some games, in this game it was for both of these guys, but these guys, there's less on their plate. It allows them to be more efficient, more effective, and I think you're seeing that here, especially in a game like this against Stanford.
Well, they just have clean paths to the football. They're not having to fight off their own blocks or run around. Guys are being blocked into them. They can just see ball, track ball, make play on the ball. And it's a simple concept, but that wasn't happening the previous years where Carolina had Sedgray, Power Eccles, whoever that linebacker was, that you knew they were better than what the film would suggest would happen to them or what maybe outside skeptics would see, just because of how bad Carolina was defensively on that side of the football. And so the linebackers are doing what I expected them to do if the front four was able to look like the way the front four has looked. I was very high on this linebacker tandem because you could see the potential from House at Washington. You saw what Andrew Simpson was capable of doing in his time over there with that Boise State program. It took some time for it to translate to Carolina, but you saw glimpses in the TCU game where before it really all fell apart for Carolina in totality, you could see the impact both of these guys were capable of having. And, with the injury to Thad Dixon, it became all the more imperative that Carolina's front four, front six, front seven took a step to help a secondary that was going to be without, its best corner and maybe its best player on defense overall. And that's happened. And so that you really got to give these guys a real big round of applause, because the secondary has been able to hold up in absence of that, because you're getting so much more consistent pressure up front. You're getting in 3rd and 7s and 3rd and 8s, and Stephen Belichick's been able to do the types of things that he was capable of doing once the defense started getting, started winning without him having to send consistent pressure. And so it looks like Bill Belichick football. You mentioned it there. What they've done the last handful of weeks is identify the weakness of the offense and attack that weakness. And as we're seeing in this conference, a lot of that weakness begins with offensive line play, the inability to run the football, and really outside of a handful of quarterbacks, below average quarterback play in this conference. And so Carolina has been able to take advantage of that, just like we thought they were going to be able to do back in the preseason. And so, look, the competition is going to take a step up the last handful of weeks. Carolina is going to play a really good Wake Forest team. They're going to play a Duke offense that has been able to move the ball against everybody in the country. And then you got a State team that from week to week, they fluctuate. But Carolina's confidence is going to be as high as it's been all year long. They're buying into the message of their head coach, because that message is starting to pay off. And it's why I think their confidence is high as it's been all year. And it's why I think they're positioned to finish the season strong and really be a lot more competitive in these 3 games than maybe we would have thought when the season began. And you heard Bill Belichick's victory speech. He talked about, we're about to play the state of North Carolina. He's going to treat these like division games when he was in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I checked, he owned the Patriots, he owned the Jets, or he owned the Bills, the Dolphins, and the Jets. Hopefully we can start owning these in-state opponents and get some wins down the stretch here, because I think this team deserves it with the way they've continued to fight despite all the noise from the outside the building. They've come together, they've become a team, and it's been really fun to watch them grow and develop the last handful of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that defensive side of the ball, I mean, you talked about it. You lose Thad Dixon in the secondary, and you think to yourself, yeah, this is probably going to go downhill. How are they going to hold up in a secondary that was just getting picked apart for most of the year? And what's happened is that the defensive front has realized that they needed to get after the quarterback a little bit more, help that defensive backfield out. And, it's really paid dividends. And you've seen other guys that have stepped up at the cornerback spot. Jaden Patterson, I think, has been fantastic. I mean, he's a guy that I think now, moving forward, you can't take him off the field. When Thad Dixon does return, and it's going to happen at some point this season, they are looking at potentially next week or the week after. Thad Dixon's going to be a guy that's going to play. The guy that should be out, it should be Marcus Allen, because you saw again in this game that he was beat a couple of times over the top, struggled to tackle in the open field. That seems like a guy that teams are really going after when they get an opportunity to. I think that is certainly a conversation that needs to be had. But, I mean, you also look at the safeties. They've stepped their game up. Gavin Gibson, I think, for most of the year has been playing really well. but he's definitely taken it to another level here over these last few weeks. And the guy that I think has shown maybe the most improvement in that entire secondary throughout the season has been Will Hardy. I think he has been really, really good here down the stretch of the season after he had that stretch, against Clemson where, he wasn't tackling well. That was something that we saw even, earlier games from him. And he really has made that adjustment. He's tackled very well here down the stretch, been a big part of what Carolina is doing in a lot of these games. And when you have that type of impact, I mean, he had 6 total tackles in this game on Saturday. When you're having that type of impact for Carolina and you're making plays on the football, taking away the middle of the field for some of these opponents, it really does make a difference. And I think that's what you're seeing from that group. Now, the one thing that you have to talk about when it came to the defense that was negative was the way that they played the final quarter. That was, something that seemed to be really coordinated by the defensive coaching staff, was to play conservative, sort of back off a little bit, and make sure that you tried to keep everything in front of you. I think you stopped seeing some of the pressure that Carolina was dialing up, which allowed them to be as successful as they were for most of the night until that final drive. And, this is something that we have seen. It's become an epidemic really at all levels of football. Whenever you get games that get a little bit out of hand, but are still in range for a team to come back. We've seen it multiple times this year in the NFL. We've seen it multiple times in college football where teams are just trying to protect big leads and they decide that they're going to go into more of a prevent type defense. And it really makes things easy for the opponent to move the ball up and down the field. Once they gain that momentum, it's hard to wrestle it back. Carolina did in this game, but I think the conservative defense that you saw from Carolina, and then we can transition over to the offensive side of the ball and talk about the lack of a running game for Carolina. That's really what hurt them down the stretch and nearly gave Stanford a chance to win the game in that fourth quarter, something that should not have even been on the table when Carolina was up 20-3.
Yeah, I don't think Stanford nearly had a chance to win because then once they got the ball back down 5, they didn't do anything with it. Had they moved the ball, then there's a much greater concern there, but that's not what happened. To me, the bigger issue was Carolina just couldn't put the ball or put the game away offensively. And I think this looks a lot different even if Carolina doesn't score, they just couldn't run any time off the clock just because they could not run the ball. And that's at some point that was going to happen. They've been able the last couple of weeks to just kind of grind these games out, turn the clock down, and get out of there. But that Stanford defense, you got to give them credit. They really bowed up all game long, made it hard on Carolina to run the football from the very beginning, and they were never overly worn down because they weren't the type of possession. I mean, Stanford held the ball longer than Carolina did. So I think the bigger issue was with Carolina's offense than with what these teams, than what Carolina did defensively, because there's nothing wrong with what Carolina's mindset was. Keep everything in front of you. You make your tackles, which I thought Carolina tackled well. You keep the clock running. You want that to happen. The bigger concern was when Marcus Allen got beat again over the top, and all of a sudden, now they pull within one score, and so look, every level of football you see it. I don't think that's something that's going to change. I think you look at Carolina's inability to put the game away offensively and be more concerned about that because, as we mentioned, with these final 3 games, if you don't put those teams away, they're good enough to come back and beat you. Whereas I think Carolina was pretty confident that once they got up 17, there was nothing Stanford was capable of doing to come back and win the football game.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like to me going into that final drive, they had all the momentum and all they needed to do was be able to move the ball down the field. And I thought there was a chance they were going to, especially with the way that Carolina had been playing for most of that fourth quarter. Credit to Steve Belichick and his staff for cranking things back up, brought a little more pressure on that final drive, and we're able to get out of there. But yeah, you're concerned about, getting Stanford's offense into a rhythm. And I don't understand why teams do this, especially when you are playing as well as Carolina was playing defensively. Remain aggressive in this game because it was paying off. That's what led to you being able to get off the field as often as you were, was because you were getting after the quarterback. You were disrupting some of the things that they were doing. And that's in that fourth quarter, things were just too easy for Elijah Brown to be able to move the ball down the field. And yeah, you got into a situation where all you have to do is throw one down the sidelines. And if Marcus Allen gets beat, all of a sudden Stanford could have put themselves in range to have a shot to try to win the game. So I thought that was one area that was a little bit concerning for me. But I think that's just something that, around all of football, they seem to like to do this. And I've seen it play out so poorly for my own team in the NFL. And you go back to even just yesterday in the NFL, it played out incredibly poorly for the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Houston Texans, going conservative against a quarterback that you didn't think was going to be able to beat you, and he finds a way to win the game, and ends up beating a team that thought that they were in control not only of that game but of their division, and now all of a sudden that division is up for grabs. That's something that for Carolina you didn't want to have to deal with. But I think you're right. The bigger concern is the lack of a running game. And the reason why it's a concern, and you could say, well, just a week ago they were extremely successful running the football. How can you be that concerned about this group? Really, it's because of the offensive line. It's because of how beat up that offensive line is. And the way that they looked in this game, I mean, this looked like the early season issues that Carolina had in run blocking. This was one of the worst rushing performances that we've seen from Carolina probably in years, because Carolina has had so many successful running backs. I mean, 27 carries in the game for 50 yards. That's an average of 1.8 yards per carry. In the second half, they had just 31 yards on 17 carries. So they could not run the ball at all. No matter what they tried to do, no matter which back they tried to bring into the game, they were not able to run the ball. Now, I think they were a little bit too conservative in terms of the use of Damon June. I thought that we've seen that throughout this year, where that has become a problem for them. Whenever he gets off to a slow start in a game, they seem to just take him completely out of the game plan. And in this game, they ran Davian Goss, which, I like, but they ran him a lot in between the tackles, which I don't like. That wasn't an area where he was going to be able to succeed. He's got a little more speed. Let's put him on the edge. Let's see what we can do out there and see if there are yards off tackle, but part of it is that it didn't really matter because the tackles weren't blocking. I thought, a poor night in run blocking from Ja'Kai Moore. I also thought, wasn't a great first showing as a full-time starter for Jordan Hall as a run blocker. But really the shocking thing was inside. I mean, your two guards, both guys graded out sub 50 in this game in run blocking, according to Pro Football Focus. Willow Steen and Daniel King both were horrible in this game in run blocking. Ja'Kai Moore was as bad as it got with a 35.5. So that's something that Carolina really has to be better about moving forward. That's the reason that I think it's okay to be concerned about this run game if you're Carolina, because with all the injuries that they have up there and with a new group that's starting up there, it makes sense why you'd be concerned about that.
Well, I think it's a twofold issue, right? I do think with the amount of injuries, there was going to become a game where Carolina wasn't as effective running the football as they've had been at different times this year. But it's next man up. You can't feel sorry for anybody. We got a season to finish. The lack of running Damon June made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
There should not be a game where he touches the ball 3 times. None whatsoever. Unless he's literally injured. And as far as we know, he was not injured. They just game planned, and it felt like they were more comfortable running Davian Goss. But as you mentioned, I would have much rather – you want to run Davian Goss 11 times, that's fine. but pound Damon June up the middle, and then you hit Goss on the edge. That really softened up the run defense. I think that would have opened up more plays to be made there in the run game. The bigger issue that I think Carolina's got to face down the stretch is teams are now going to put 8, 9 guys in the box, 8, 9 yards off the line of scrimmage, and dare you to beat them throwing the football. And until Gio Lopez and this passing offense shows a consistent ability to do so, then I think the Carolina run game, with the injuries among the offensive line, it's going to be more compromised now than it was early on in the season. And so that's got to be an adjustment that Freddie Kitchens and this offensive staff, they make going into the final 3 games, because Carolina can't run the ball the way they did on Saturday and win 2 of their final 3 games, go to a bowl game. They just can't. And so part of that means is you're going to have to open up the play calling with the passing game. You're going to have to be more trustworthy of your quarterback and ask him to make some bigger throws early on in the game, just so you can get some advantages with the way the defense lines up to where you can run the football. And so hopefully that adjustment is made, because I think this was always going to happen, right? There was always going to come a point in time where Carolina's run game bogged down, because these defenses just don't respect your ability to throw the football. And at some point, they were going to put 8, 9 guys in the box and be able to slow down your run game. That happened on Saturday against Stanford. You were able to make enough plays to win the game, but you weren't, it wasn't nowhere near as explosive as we maybe thought it would be, given how bad Stanford had been on that side of the ball entering the game so far this season. So, they've got some adjustments there to be made, but hopefully when we get ready for Wake Forest, they do get back to what their heart and soul of their offense is, which is Damon June, and give him the requisite carries. His talent and his production level has earned him so far this season.
Yeah, and look, Wake Forest is going to be a test, man. That defense is playing incredibly well. You would imagine that, as you said, they're going to probably load the box. Now, the thing is that most teams have been doing that this year. They've been daring Gio Lopez to try to beat them. That's not something that's new. So Carolina should not be caught off guard by the fact that this is happening now. It's just about, you've got to have some belief in these guys that are out there. I mean, for Damon June, there's got to be consistency with him. He's got to be able to run the ball a certain amount of times per game. And I'm not saying that it's the same number every week, but I mean, you've got to get to a point where he knows that he's a consistent contributor, where Davian Goss knows he's a consistent contributor, where Benjamin Hall knows that he's a consistent contributor. It can't keep being this week-to-week thing where you're just throwing whoever is you believe is hot out there onto the field. I mean, I don't know what their strategy was the other night, because no one was hot. I guess they did end up actually finding out that Davian Goss was probably the best back to be on the field, because in that drive where they make it 10-3, he was catching the ball out of the backfield. I mean, he was sensational on that drive. There's no doubt they made the right decision using him there, because he's more dynamic as a receiver. But I mean, yeah, it just, to me, it really starts with, the continuity in the backfield, knowing that what your role is at Carolina for these young running backs. And then it's on this offensive line, man. They've got to just block better, because I mean, you've got to be able to win at the line of scrimmage. They were getting pushed back off the line of scrimmage from the word go, and that never changed at any point in this game. You were hoping by the fourth quarter that, man, things would change just a little bit. You'd be able to pick up a couple of first downs here and there, and the game would not have been that close. But because you literally could not pick up a first down, and for Carolina, there were times, where they chose to run the football where it was still the right call. Even though you weren't getting anything, taking that time off the clock was more important. I get why they were doing that. So if you're criticizing Freddie Kitchens for that, I did not actually think this was one of the worst game plans that we saw from him this year. It was just that Carolina was not effective enough up front, and they need to be much better run blocking, down the stretch of the season. Look, they've got a tough defense coming up in Wake Forest, but you've got two defenses that to close out the season have been pushed around for most of the year. They have given up some yards. They have given up some points. You've got to be able to turn that back to what you were able to do against Syracuse, what you were able to do to a certain extent against Virginia. You just have to have some pulse in the run game in order to be able to succeed. All right. Now let's get to the polarizing topic when it comes to this team, and that would be Gio Lopez, because he has a lot of people thinking that Carolina should go in a different direction when the season is over. He has other people that believe that he's making the throws that he needs to in the second half of games, and that maybe there is a conversation for him to ultimately be back next year. I don't think that's the conversation that needs to be had. I think the conversation that many people were having in the first half of this game was, is he even the best guy for the remainder of the season? I think with the second half that he put together, he is the guy for the remainder of the season. And you look, first half, 5 of 8, 29 yards, 28 yards, a fumble in the first half. Just absolutely terrible. One of the worst halves of football that you're going to see from a quarterback. Wasn't doing anything for Carolina. And as a result, with the run game struggling the way that it was, just 47 yards of total offense in the first half for Carolina. They were lucky to be in a tied game at halftime, to say the least. You go to the second half, 13 of 17, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns, made every play that he had to for Carolina, still missed some throws even in that second half down the field. I mean, that is really what I think is concerning, is that there is absolutely no downfield passing game. It is, everything is short, intermediate, and intermediate is being generous. I mean, it's usually 10 yards. Maybe the max you'll see him complete is a 15-yard play. But for the most part, it is 10 yards and in for him with most of his completions. That's something that, has to be able to change if Carolina is going to be able to beat some of these teams down the stretch of the season. For him, I still think he's the best. He's the guy that best positions Carolina to win games right now, because I just don't know that throwing a true freshman into this situation is going to ultimately lead to success for Carolina. But there's no doubt he needs to be more consistent in these games. He's got to have better first halves than he's had in each of the last 2 games, because he's shown up in the second half of these last 2. But that first half has been pretty bad in both circumstances.
Yeah, but, they don't win the game without him on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
He was Carolina's best offensive player. I don't know what that says, but, he did throw 2 touchdowns and made the plays that he had to make to give Carolina, or put Carolina a chance to win the game, which of course they were able to go on and do. I still don't think he's the biggest issue. I still think your play caller has done a terrible job putting together quality game plans. I think Carolina's scheme isn't where we thought it was going to be on that side of the ball either. But that's not being changed until this season comes to an end, if it changes at all. They're going to ride Gio Lopez out. So the idea of them putting in Max Johnson, Bryce Baker, Newkirk, whoever, not going to happen unless Gio does get injured. And hopefully you're not sitting at home or sitting in the stands rooting for that. Now, post this year, no, Carolina needs to be open to bringing in a different quarterback. Mm-hmm. Depending on how they finish the season, there might be quarterbacks very interested in coming to play at North Carolina, i.e. a guy like Lenore Sellers, who is more than likely going to seek an exit from South Carolina and grew up wanting to be a Carolina fan. If that guy is in the portal, Gio Lopez should not stand in the way of you being interested in bringing that guy in. I think everything will be on the table where Carolina could be open to bringing him back. Maybe you mirror him with a different play caller. You get the best out of him. But maybe, Carolina is able to go big game hunting and get a quarterback that we heard last transfer portal. Whenever there was a big name that was in the portal from a quarterback perspective, we were told Carolina was going to be a player, which meant Carolina was ready to pony up the money. And you could say to a certain degree they did pony up the money for Gio. They gave him a 2-year deal worth $4 million. But we were told Carolina was willing to pay $4 million for a quarterback. There's going to be a big quarterback or two in the portal this offseason, just like there is every offseason. So has he been the player he thought he was going to be? Absolutely not. You see glimpses of it. You see it in spurts where he'll make the plays with his arm that, he evades the rush in the pocket, steps up, makes a beautiful play, or, feels the pass rush, takes off and runs, but it's not consistent enough. And if Carolina would have had more consistent quarterback play with the way this defense has played throughout the majority of the season, there's a very good chance we're talking about a 6-3 football team as opposed to a 4-5 football team. Not saying that it's all on Gio, but that's the nature of how this works. When you win, the quarterback gets the praise. When you lose, the quarterback gets the blame. So it'll be interesting to see what Carolina does when the season does come to an end. I would hope, though, that they're open-minded to upgrading that position, because I think there are going to be better quarterbacks available to add to your program via the portal this offseason.
Yeah, Lenora Sellers might be a little bit much, considering that Miami is looking to pony up big time for a quarterback. I don't know if Carolina has the money to be able to compete with that. We will have to wait and see. But that is one of the names that they have said Miami could be eyeing. So certainly a big name that, I would believe is probably going to enter the transfer portal after the year that he's had. There could be some turnover at South Carolina as well that leads to him entering the transfer portal. So certainly an interesting name to keep an eye on. But I think that's the right approach, is that two things can be true. He can be the best guy for this team right now, but not the best guy for the future of this team, where they need to go out and get a quarterback. I think that is, in my mind, undoubtedly where you are at, because you just got a quarterback that's too inconsistent. You've got a guy who simply misses important throws. He missed them in the early portion of the season, missed some throws, in the first half of these last couple of games that he should be hitting. And, when it comes to the downfield throws, it's just not there. I mean, he just cannot throw the football deep accurately. So with that, you need to find somebody that's able to do that, because the deep passing game is important. Having an explosive passing game is just part of what allows you to succeed in the modern era. And the way that Carolina is winning these games right now is not going to be sustainable for all of next year. You're not going to bank on your defense to be as phenomenal as they've been this year to get you these last two wins. And, I don't know what it's ultimately going to look like down the stretch of this season. So if Carolina finishes 4-8, you can point back to these games and be like, well, it was successful here, but you're going to need more from that offensive side of the ball more consistently. Like, you've got to be able to get to a point where you can score 30 in a game. I mean, Carolina has not scored 30 in a game so far this season outside of the game against Richmond. That has to be something that's in play for them moving forward with this staff. And so, yes, Freddie Kitchens is definitely part of the blame, but you've gotten below average offensive coordinator, offensive play calling, and you've gotten below average quarterback play for most of the year. And so something needs to change there at the end of the season. But for right now, this is the guy that gives you the best hope of winning these games. And he stood in there, made some throws. The throw that he made to Jordan Shipp that ultimately ended up winning the game, that was a really big throw for Carolina. So hopefully he is able to do that down the stretch and get Carolina a couple of wins to find their way into a bowl game. But the conversation after the year has to be, is he the best thing for Carolina? Did also want to shout out the receiver duo that did step up. These guys playing really well right now. And Kobe Paysour, 6 catches, 54 yards on 9 targets. Jordan Shipp, 5 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. He was sensational in this game, makes a huge play after the catch on his 55-yard touchdown. So certainly a guy that, as you've seen, as the season has gone along, has become more consistent, has become that number one that Carolina needs at the wide receiver position. Kobe Paysour, a perfect guy to play off of him at number 2. Definitely a guy that is making the life easier for Gio Lopez when it comes to picking up first downs. We saw that in this game. He picked up some key first downs for Carolina on some short passes. Now it's about finding the guy for the future that can go alongside of Jordan Shipp. I don't know who that's going to be because, in the slot, Carolina hasn't had any sort of consistency there, even in terms of the guys that are playing. They get switched on and off the field as much as the running backs do. So they need to find that steady number 3 producer here during this next stretch. But credit to those guys who have been really good so far in the last 2 games for sure, really dating back to the game against Virginia, where both guys were also pretty productive. All right, now we go to the big picture of where Carolina sits. And as we mentioned, Carolina with 3 games to go in this season, 3 games against in-state opponents, basically divisional opponents for Bill Belichick and this staff. They are going to look at this as an incredibly important stretch for Carolina, and as it should be. It's the final 3 games of the season. It's what can get you into a bowl game, and it's against teams that you would consider rivals to a certain extent, at least with Wake Forest. The other 2 are known rivals. I would expect that he's going to treat the Duke game, because he talked about how his first words were beat Duke, going to treat that a lot like he treated the Jets at the NFL level. And you would feel like NC State is probably something that's been communicated to him, how much Carolina really values beating them, especially here in recent years. So as we go into the stretch, where is your confidence level in this team right now going into this one? Because I think that these last 2 wins, they've been nice, but Syracuse and Stanford clearly worse teams than Wake, Duke, and NC State.
Yeah, I said it today. I'm as confident as I've been since we saw Carolina get waxed against the first handful of power conference games they played. I think they're going to go to a bowl game. I firmly believe there are 2 wins to be had down the stretch here, and I wouldn't rule out them winning all 3 of these games, man. I really wouldn't. It's not going to be easy. I think the Wake Forest game stylistically sets up very well for them, because Wake Forest wants to kind of play the same style of football Carolina does. Low possession, field position battle, all that stuff. I think Carolina's going to be very comfortable in that game. I know it's going to be on the road. It'll be a jacked up environment, whatever that means when you play in Winston-Salem. But I think that game is very winnable. And then you look at those last 2 games. That Duke game, I think, is going to be very intriguing because, I think, as you mentioned, Belichick will treat that like he treated the Jets. I do think there is a fever and a hatred for them that I think will be kind of nice to see on the football side of things, even though they're not our biggest rival in football. And I think it's been communicated to him what state means to us, how important it is to beat them. Really, just how important it is to beat Dave Doran, because in our lifetime, there's not been a more classless, underachieving failure of a human being that has ran his mouth more than Dave. And I think Belichick would kind of like to come in here and just reestablish order that, hey, there's a reason why you're a little brother, and there's a reason why you'll never achieve the things that we've been able to achieve, even at North Carolina. So I'm really confident, man. It's not going to be, as I mentioned, easy. These teams are better than the 2 teams Carolina's beaten the last 2 weeks, but I like the confidence that this group is playing with. They're seeing what the Bill Belichick process, the results that it can deliver. I think the fan base has gotten behind this team as well, and they're a big part of this. So I think it's going to be a really fun stretch to the end of the regular season, and I think when we're sitting there after the final game, we'll be talking about where Carolina could be heading to a bowl game because I think there's 2 more wins in their future.
Yeah, I think you are 100% right. I do think that Carolina has 2 wins here somewhere along the way. I think they find a way to get it done because this defense is one that you can believe in, and it's a unit that you should believe in. I know there are people that are probably still scarred by what has happened over the last handful of years, the last decade plus, under the, when it comes to Tar Heel football, under the direction of Larry Fedora and then eventually Mac Brown. But this is a group that you should believe can carry Carolina to a bowl game. The offense, I think there is reasons to still be concerned, but I think Gio Lopez is making enough plays, and I think that's going to continue for Carolina the remainder of the season. You just have to get enough from him if this defense is able to hold up. And I think the way that this defense is playing, this will be one of the tougher defenses that Duke has faced, that NC State has faced here recently. So I do think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for them on the other side of things. And yeah, Carolina, if they can continue to get after the quarterback, I don't know how bad these offensive lines are that Carolina is getting ready to face. I find it hard to believe that they are as bad as the last 2 offensive lines that Carolina has played. But you saw what Carolina was able to do against Virginia. Wasn't the greatest offensive line, but certainly better and was holding up well enough to get that team to where they were coming into that game against Carolina. Carolina was able to get after the quarterback pretty successfully in that one. So I think that's the game that probably gives me the most confidence that Carolina can find a way to get to a bowl game, is what they did against Virginia. And you're saying, well, that was a loss. But that was a game you should have been able to find a way to win. And if you were able to do that, I mean, Virginia is a better team than Wake Forest. Virginia, even though Wake Forest just beat them, I think Virginia overall is having a better season than them. I think NC State is definitely a worse team than Virginia. And I think that Duke is a worse team than Virginia at this point in the season. So I think Carolina, should be able to get 2 wins. I think you're right. Wake Forest really sets up very similar to Carolina in terms of they're going to play a low-scoring game offensively. They are not thriving at this point. It's really their defense that's carrying them, so that's going to be a slugfest. Can you just find a way to make enough plays down the stretch of the game? I think Carolina is going to be able to do that, and then all you have to do is get one of the last 2. Either find a way to win your last home game against Duke, which is no doubt going to be tough. That's the best quarterback that you may have faced all season long, which is really saying something. But I do think that, that game against State sets up for success as well for Carolina because of just how bad that defense is. That is the chance for Carolina. If there's a game that Carolina can score 30 in this season, that's probably the game that you give them the best chance to do it because of how bad State's defense is. So I think along the way, I would say Wake Forest and NC State are the 2 wins for Carolina. I know that's crazy to believe that Carolina goes on the road to NC State and finds a way to win, but I do think that that will be one of those games where Carolina is going to be extremely motivated. I think that Bill Belichick is going to know how to press all the right buttons, and I think with a bowl game on the line, Carolina will find a way to get into a bowl game. So my belief level is pretty high, and again, it all goes back to that defensive side of the football and what they have been doing. Now, let's get to the question that I did not think we would have to ask today. Thought maybe we might have to ask this in the offseason, but here we are. The New York Giants, they fire head coach Brian Daboll earlier today, a much-needed firing from the Giants, and now they end up resetting and trying to go in a different direction, but they've got some talent on the defensive side of the ball. They've got a really good quarterback, a really good young quarterback in Jackson Dart that they believe in, and the question has popped up with how much the Giants have struggled in recent years. Should they turn to Bill Belichick as their head coach? And this is a job that Belichick has dreamed of for a while. He was a defensive coordinator for the Giants earlier in his career under Bill Parcells. That is a job that he has said he values very much and would love to have at some point. We know that there is probably still some appetite to get back into the NFL and continue to chase Don Shula's record for the number of wins at the NFL level. So this could be something that Bill Belichick could entertain. But ultimately, I think the biggest question for this podcast is how concerned are you that he could leave for the New York Giants job? How concerned are you that he could leave for an NFL job this offseason?
Not overly. It's another year older for him. And I don't see an organization willing to put up with the drama that comes with his relationship.
Yeah.
Carolina sold their soul to him. We got to put up with it. And it has kind of quieted down since the second bye week, but there was no denying that it was a distraction the first month and a half of the season, where she was as visible as anything, as any part of the program before and after football games, no matter the result. The Giants opening is the one that scares you the most because the way he reveres that job. I just don't think from a timeline perspective it makes a whole lot of sense for him. That's an organization that's been borderline irrelevant for a decade and a half now. And they are looking to rebuild with their young quarterback. If you're hiring Bill Belichick, you're hiring Bill Belichick because you're wanting to go chase a Super Bowl. You want to go chase a championship. The Giants are nowhere near close to competing for a playoff spot, let alone a championship. So and maybe he would go there just so he could work, end his career there and get the win record and move on. I feel like if he goes back to the NFL level, there's still that motivation to get that title post Tom Brady that Brady got in Tampa Bay. And that would not be something that would be achievable with the Giants. We got to see how the rest of the coaching carousel in the NFL plays out. And maybe there's another organization that becomes more desperate to hire what would then be a 74-year-old head coach that has the girlfriend that he has that is as, I don't know if controlling is the right word, but is as involved with his personal life as she is. But I think he knew when he took this job, this is where he was going to end his coaching career. I think he's done a really good job acclimating himself here to the college game. I think he does enjoy the college campus lifestyle. We've seen him at numerous UNC sporting events. So maybe it's because I don't want to believe it because I bought into it when he got hired, and I've come back around on him since the second bye week here. But I think he wants to build something here. And as of right now, I'm not overly concerned he's leaving to go to the NFL anytime soon.
Yeah, as a guy that knows the Giants pretty well, this seems like something that they would entertain. Now, the thing is I don't know how much, and it's going to depend on who the decision maker is in this. John Mara, the owner of the Giants, is, as many of you probably know because you follow the NFL, he's going through a battle with cancer. So for him, we have to figure out how involved is he going to be in this coaching search. Is he going to be a guy that's pushing really hard to make the hire himself, even though he's going to keep Joe Schoen, it looks like, employed as the GM? If this is Joe Schoen's hire, there is no way in hell that Bill Belichick is getting hired here. But Joe Schoen is going to want to go with a younger coach. He's going to want to probably go with an offensive mind. Because of the way that we've seen the NFL go. Maybe he does look on the defensive side of the ball, but he's going to want to go with a younger coach. I don't think he's going to want somebody with a similar attitude to what you just had in Brian Daboll either. And I get it. Daboll is a guy that is incredibly irritated at all times, seems very a very rough exterior for Daboll. I think that Bill Belichick's image has become a little softer at Carolina, But still, I mean, hiring that old curmudgeon-like coach, I don't know if that's the direction that they're going to go. They're looking for someone that can breathe a little bit of energy into this team, something that they have lacked really since Tom Coughlin was their head coach. And so I would believe that the Giants are probably going to go young. I would look more towards someone like Clint Kubiak, who is an offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. Jesse Minter, who is the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers. Those are probably areas that I would think that Joe Schoen would go. Now, if you do have John Merrigan involved, I do think there is a chance that Bill Belichick could be the guy if he's pushing for him, because he knows his background. He knows the pedigree that he brings with him. I don't know ultimately, though. The thing that, leaves me questioning whether or not John Mara would be fully in on it is what you brought up with Jordan Hudson's involvement. I just don't know that they want to go through all of that. And we know that she is a little overbearing when it comes to Belichick and being involved in his life. And so that's where I think maybe you end up getting saved if you're Carolina. And if you're the New York Giants, the other thing that you brought up that I think is a great point is that they are nowhere near where they need to be for Bill Belichick to take this job. To me, a job that would make more sense for him. Now, would they be interested in him? I have no idea. But let's say that the Baltimore Ravens were to fire John Harbaugh for some reason. Bringing in Bill Belichick, that would make a lot more sense for Belichick, because that's a team that, if you get the right coach in there, you feel like you shore some things up defensively. All of a sudden, that's a team that you could look at and say they will be competing to potentially win the Super Bowl during his time there. That's ultimately what he should be looking for, because, got to be honest, if he goes to the Giants, he's 26 wins away from tying Don Shula. I don't know if he gets 26 wins with the Giants. Maybe the Giants aren't that far away. I mean, there have been, they have lost 4 games that they were up 10 plus points in. So maybe it really is that simple that if you hire him, those games aren't lost, and the Giants are 6-4 on the season or fighting for a playoff spot. But I don't know if it's necessarily that easy as someone that watches this team every single week. So to me, I don't think you should be that concerned if you are a Panthers fan, if you are a Tar Heel fan. But I do think that it is something that is noteworthy and at least worth monitoring over the next couple of months as the Giants eventually make their decision at head coach. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Read the recap article that we have up there where I go a little bit more in depth on some of my takeaways from the game. So make sure you go and check that out. We will, of course, have you covered for the game against Wake Forest with a preview of that game. Of course, anything else that comes out around the program, including the availability report, if it's one that's of significance. Last week there was really only one significant injury that was on that report, and so we gave that to you with Chad Lindbergh being out for what we expect to be the remainder of the season. Any other updates like that come out, any updates on Thad Dixon and his status, we will, of course, have you covered here on HeelToughBlog.com. Also, the basketball program got you covered on everything going on with the team as they get their season off to a strong start early. Josh had you covered with recaps and previews of the first 2 games of the season, and he's going to continue to do that all season long. He also had you covered last night with the injury news when it came to Seth Trimble. So go ahead, check that article out. There is a timeline that has been updated for Seth's injury, so we'll let you know more about that on the next edition of the Four Corners podcast. But make sure you go over to the website and read all that stuff so that you are prepared. When it comes to the podcast, Four Corners Podcast is in the same place that you get this podcast when it comes to the video side of things. So you can get us on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube, which is what we are pushing hard. Make sure you go to that YouTube page, give us a subscription over there. And if you can, go ahead and watch it over there on YouTube. Those numbers help us out when it comes to getting sponsors. So Make sure that you guys do smash that subscribe button for us. We would greatly appreciate that. And then when it comes to the audio editions of the podcast, you can find the Four Corners podcast, the same place that you can find the Heel Tough Blog podcast, wherever you get your podcast. So that wraps it up once again for this edition of the show. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.